Hello, everybody. Can you hear me? Oh, my volume is up. Oh, good. Yeah, thunderous. Gosh, all my Mick Jagger fantasies are being fulfilled here. Yeah. Well, I want to talk about reaching the client. But before I do that, I'd like to take a moment to thank, a dozen, maybe not quite that many folks from my apprenticeship program who crossed that long bridge between my program and the Pluto School and came long distances to be here. Would you all stand up, people in the apprenticeship program? I just really want to thank you personally for coming. Xenophobia seems to be pretty epidemic in the astrological world. And I have a vision of a time when we've got 100 more people in this room, folks who come from Earth 2, I think was a metaphor this morning. There is an Earth 2 of evolutionary astrology that's similar in magnitude to Pluto School. And I suspect there's an Earth 3 out there somewhere of folks with whom we haven't even built the bridges yet. And when we build the bridges together, when we come together in one unified force, we are the greatest force in modern astrology, and we can save the soul of modern astrology, which is a worthy enterprise. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say about that. Well, take a picture of this. You're sitting with a friend in a cafe, a dear friend, tried and true, somebody you've been through the fires with. And you're talking about a really painful situation in your life, some challenge you're facing in, let's say, a primary relationship. Imagine that, things have gotten very difficult there for you. And you're just pouring your heart out, every bit of psychological understanding you can generate about yourself, and of course, gobs of psychological understanding regarding your partner. And after you have finished this heartfelt speech about your evolutionary predicament, your dear, trusted friend looks kind of quiet, tentative, and vulnerable, and then makes eye contact with you and says, I want to tell you something I don't think you're going to like to hear. I really don't think you're being very honest with yourself. Well, there's a moment that has a fairly familiar emotional fingerprint, wouldn't you say? I mean, that's what friends are for. In principle, we all understand that we value that friend more than ever for taking that risk and saying what, let's say, she actually sees about what's going on at tremendous personal risk. She is willing to risk the entirety of our relationship, which she values as much as we value, for the sake of keeping it honest. And officially, we really appreciate that, right? Officially. It's enlightenment is easy if it's a theoretical proposition. You can write everything you need to know on a single page. You can write it in a single word, love, and there it is. That's enlightenment. Understanding it's not that difficult, but to live it, to walk the path, this is much harder. And what we have in that moment I've just described is a Plutonian challenge. Our friend is channeling Pluto energy to us, saying, here is possibly a difficult and possibly a useful truth for you in your journey. And you're knowing that this is a person who has passed every test that you have ever put her through. And likely what you're going to hear might be really evolutionary rocket fuel for you if you can take it in. Now, it might be wrong as well, because we will often hear well-intended advice from people we really trust that comes out of their blindness and their woundedness, even though they're quite confident it has to do with us. Any of us in the room have never done that one to somebody we loved. So, the two little spiritual monkeys, our little primate humans, doing their best to love each other well and support each other in the journey. And what I'm talking about is the incredible amount of trust, just sheer trust or love, that must exist as the bridge between two such souls if we are going to allow such information to enter us from that other person. We have to trust if we're going to keep our defenses down enough to listen with an open heart. And that person has earned that trust over arbitrarily, let me say, 10 years of time. 10 years in the fire. And that's what friendship is made of. What a beautiful thing. Now, a client knocks on your door for a birth chart reading. And this is a person who's never seen you before, you've never seen them before. And inside of 2 minutes, you can be talking about material that will push that person to their edges. You're talking about extremely hot, charged psychological material that is really hard to hear for that person. And they have absolutely no reason at all to trust you. None at all. You know, they saw in your brochure you're a graduate of Pluto School or a graduate of, the apprenticeship program. They've never heard of those things. And, actually, here's somebody with a PhD from Harvard in psychology who's completely insane and damages everybody that has misfortune getting close to him. Credentials, what does that mean, really, when it comes to trusting your life with another person? They may mean something more abstractly. What I am emphasizing here is the incredible act of trust which we require of our clients. We require a level of trust on their part that I don't think I'm exaggerating it if I say it is superhuman, which means therefore we shouldn't expect that much trust from the clients, because we shouldn't expect people to be superhuman. We shouldn't set standards that are so high that nobody can ever reach them. And yet, if we look at the transaction in the evolutionary astrological counseling room, that's exactly what's going on. What a challenge it is to get this information across. Now, I was having a conversation not too many years ago in California with some evolutionary astrological folks who, to protect the guilty, will remain nameless here. These are actually Pluto School folks who are now defrocked for a good reason. Not castrated. I believe Jeffrey was fairly gentle under the circumstances. But in this particular situation to which I'm alluding, it was just a casual conversation. A guy had done a reading for a woman. And he had, I believe, probably quite accurately analyzed her evolutionary predicament using the familiar intellectual, mental, theoretical principles of evolutionary astrology. And he was boasting to us about how he had nailed her. Okay? I really nailed her. It bothered me. It's bothering you too, isn't it? I mean, we can use that figure of speech, and I don't want to censor people's speech. You're talking with your friends, say, I nailed somebody. We all know what it means. You accurately describe their predicament to them. But that language conveyed something to me about what that person's attitude was towards the counseling process. And let me just turn it around. How would you feel if you were nailed? As in nailed to the cross, by the evolutionary astrologer. See, we now have this incredible tool in our hands that, as Jeffrey has pointed out, has not existed, so far as we know, in the history of our species. The evolutionary astrology, as it exists now, there's never been available to humans such a powerful, insightful method for generating understanding about a soul's evolutionary predicament. We've never been able to get that deep so quickly from a piece of paper. That's what we've accomplished. And of course, and I believe Jeffrey would be happy and delighted to back me up on this one, it's just beginning. I mean, we're passing on the torch, and, young people are coming into the field, and lots of different perspectives are arising, and the synthesis of what we're creating here, we've only begun to see the power of what this paradigm can do. And here's an analogy. I think we can split the atom, and this is going to make dynamite look like firecracker. Was there a downside to that development? No power comes into the world without bringing Lucifer with it. Lucifer smells the power. Lucifer loves that power. Lucifer says, I can get to astrologers' egos and teach them how to nail people. Okay? Now, a second ago, I asked the rhetorical question, how do you feel if you were nailed? And, in an extreme scenario, if you have been confronted not with lies, but with powerful truth about your evolutionary predicament, not a syllable that is an error, but you're not ready for it, and you weren't supported in the process of hearing it. If you are presented with that kind of material, it is not inconceivable that you would commit suicide within 24 hours. That's extreme, and I don't mean to get all breathless and over the top, but it is possible that somebody in a fragile condition, perhaps at the edge of psychosis, receiving that kind of information, could feel so defeated by it that they actually killed themselves, which is probably not helpful from an evolutionary perspective. Fair enough? Yeah. And hey, we're all about helping, right? Isn't that why we're doing this? Aren't we doing this because the highest law in this universe is love, and that's what we're trying to channel to people through this work? The insight is beautiful and important, but love, we can't ever lose sight of that. Now, most people aren't going to commit suicide. Here's what's going to happen most of the time. If somebody is presented with the truth that they are not yet ready to hear, what they're going to do is become resistant to that truth. They're going to reject that truth. They're going to develop a kind of immune response to that truth, just like you develop an immune response to a bacteria or something. You get sick for a little while, and then you're maybe never going to be bothered by it anymore. Okay, so there are truths that we can hit people with, and they're never going to be bothered by them anymore? Now, is that helpful from an evolutionary point of view? We can get to the core issue of the person's life, and we shock them into a condition where they will reject that truth for the rest of this incarnation. Again, was that helpful or unhelpful? It's an easy question. Now, of course, I'm not saying we should stop doing this, but a glaring issue in astrological practice in general, and I think our community is not immune to it, is that there is so much emphasis on theoretical understanding and relatively little emphasis upon the skills of presentation of this material to a client. Sometimes we will get vague encouragement to, take counseling classes, learn some of the things that psychologists have learned. And that's not a bad idea, but it is not sufficient because we're not psychologists. A psychologist has it easy compared to us. A psychologist sits there with a total stranger, and both of them understand we are total strangers. Let's get to know each other. Tell me your story. And, how many times have you heard this one? I was in therapy for 3 years, and I learned more from that astrologer in 1 hour. Yeah, okay. And, when we astrologers, we hear that, we're happy. It feels good. Our egos like it. We have this incredible thing, makes a psychologist look dumb, makes us feel a little taller, That's a beautiful thing. But again, it's like nuclear power, We got this nuclear power. It comes right back to that. So the psychological counseling skills, I don't want to be dismissive of them. They can be quite useful, and it behooves us to learn something about all that. But ultimately, they don't really fit the realities that we evolutionary astrologers are facing. This is a totally new problem. It didn't exist before, say, 1984. So how do we do it? How do we face this challenge of building a bridge of trust with a client that can handle the weight, the magnitude of the power of these insights without breaking, without the bridge breaking or without the person breaking? How do we do that? Well, it's a big question, needless to say. And what I want to present here over this next little while, however much time I have left, is a rather simple but rigorous paradigm for letting the chart of the client tell you how to relate to the client. And there's a really beautiful discipline in here as far as the inner work of being an astrologer goes that has to do with getting over yourself or getting over your own blindness. Like here's one that I I learned the hard way. I'm ashamed to say, sincerely ashamed about what I'm about to say. Here's a lesson I learned. I only had to kill about 100, 200 people to learn this lesson. A slight exaggeration, I pray, but I don't know. I'm very scorpionic. Got a Scorpio South Node in the 12th house, and Scorpio rising, and Pluto quincunx my sun. So I'm real Plutonian. And when I was a younger astrologer, I used to actually pride myself on the idea that I was like a safecracker. I can get into anybody. Nobody's defenses are safe around me. People come to me, well, they better be ready to deal with their stuff, because there's nobody I can't get to open up. Pretty stupid in retrospect. It's like, where was I coming from? That was pure ego, and I'll own that, and I'll confess that. I've had to let go of some of my attachment to my own intensity to be a better astrologer. I've had to learn that sometimes a client will send a message, okay, my cup is full. And I'll say, hey, I just filled a thimble, I've got a gallon more here, I'm just dying to give it to you, And it's all good stuff, And the person's eyes are going around, So knowing when to get my ego out of it enough to be able to say, okay, this person has had enough. This person has gotten what they've come here for. I've done a better job by closing my mouth. That's just a little example. But here's the holy grail in counseling astrology lies in establishing a connection with the client's moon, which is to say with their heart. There's a very, very simple principle behind this, that all of our stuff is carried 90% in the emotional body. A way of kind of corralling that and understanding it, in all of our experience, we've met people who've, done extensive conventional psychotherapy, like 15 years of therapy, and they're a walking ball of insights into themselves, and it hadn't changed them a bit. I have this picture of a woman, let's say, happily succumbing to her shopping compulsion, because her parents couldn't love her in a concrete way, so they just gave her stuff, and stuff became symbolic of love, and that kind of familiar 9 yards. And so now she has a compulsion to shop and buy stuff, and she can never get enough because she's trying to get love, and the stuff symbolizes love. A fairly conventional situation. So there she is, fairly crazy. And then she goes into psychotherapy and comes into an understanding of the equation of objects with love that existed in her family of origin. She has a brilliant understanding of why she is like that. Here she is shopping again. Doesn't know what else to do. Doesn't know where to put her foot forward on an evolutionary path. She has all the insight in the world. It has not helped her at all. I don't want to beat up insight. We're all in the insight business fundamentally as astrologers. But I also want to recognize that the insights that make a difference for people are the ones that sink down into the marrow of their bones, that sink down into the heart. Tears in the office will often suggest an evolutionary breakthrough. It's not as silly as saying our aim is to make people cry, but when we see the tears, many times that means a person has come to a point of catharsis. This is what I mean, or one of the things I mean, when I say we have to contact the moon. But the moon by its nature is very cautious. Moon is kind of hidden. People are not going to show their moons until they know you pretty well. Let me just concretize that for you. You're at a cocktail party. Brie and Chardonnay, Everybody's all dressed up, And they're all being quite polite with each other at this cocktail party. We've all been to situations like this. And the subject of the new Harry Potter book comes up, conversationally. And at this cocktail party, we think, oh, yes, it's quite an interesting phenomenon, this Harry Potter thing, isn't it? Because we don't really know if the person we're talking to likes that book or not. Okay? Now, if you're with your friends, real friends, and the essence of friendship is that we have revealed our moons, You're going to say, I'm so excited about the new Harry Potter book, or I hate the fucking Harry Potter book. You're just going to let it rip. You're going to be ridiculous, and spontaneous and loose, and here's what I am, unguarded. That's moon energy. Our moon energy is kind of ridiculous usually. We're a little silly there. Well, other things we could say, but that's a big part of the human piece of it. Now, when we're meeting with a client, it's a little bit more like the cocktail party. We're polite, typically, as we're kind of getting to know each other. And that is a utterly predictable and natural way for strangers to relate. We don't open our hearts to people who haven't earned that. It's just natural that we don't. Okay, so the Holy Grail is to get to the moon, but there's a long road to the moon. Now, for purposes of this talk, which perforce must be a little shorter than this subject would require, I'm gonna do a superhighway to the moon. And the superhighway, there are basically 3 stops, and the third one is the moon. It goes ascendant, sun, moon. I'd tweak that a little bit in advance simply by making a rather obvious technical point that if a planet is on the ascendant, that planet becomes part of the ascendant. Similarly, planet on the sun. I'd pay most attention to conjunctions or a planet in the first house here, trying to keep the system real simple and real clean. And our aim with it is to find a map into connecting with the client. Now let me start with the ascendant. The aim with the ascendant is to establish rapport, just a simple human rapport with the client. Let me just briefly say that with the sun, what we're aiming for is to establish a basis for trust between ourselves and the client. So we have rapport at a simple human level, then trust, and if we get those right, we begin to have access to the moon. Let me start again, as I say, with the ascendant. Now, the ascendant is of course, an exceedingly complex subject. I want to touch on just a few pieces of it here. And some of this, I feel a little like a Zoroastrian who's fallen in with a bunch of Mithraists, with the Pluto School energy here. In an apprenticeship program, our language is a little different. It's always complementary, has been my experience. But one of the takes we put on the ascendant, my favorite metaphor really is that it's like stained glass through which all the complexity and depth of your soul shines into the world. And it's given a tint as it comes out through that stained glass. So you have a certain style through which others will see you. I think of red stained glass and white light shining through it. And the stained glass, the red stained glass, the physics of it is that it blocks all the wavelengths of light except for the red that comes through. Okay, similarly, in most of our social interactions, we have to do a lot of editing. We have to hold back an awful lot of what we are. Example, the checkout girl in the grocery store who knows your face says, "Hi, how are you?" And what's your line? "Fine. How are you?" And she says, "Fine." And, if we were 17 years old, we'd say, "Oh, how shallow and dishonest." Oh, give us a break. You like her. You wish her well. She likes you. There's an exchange of energy between the souls. Neither of you are fine. Technically you're lying, But it's not about how you are. Just imagine there's somebody ahead of you in the line, and they decide to give her an honest answer. After a while, you'd say, "Get your act together." And that's kind of what the ascendant is, or a piece of it. Again, a giant subject. But this idea of the outer perimeter of our expression into the world, if we're like cells, this is the membrane. The ascendant is the boundary between consciousness and cosmos, between the inner and the outer, through which we relate to the outer world. And a healthy cell membrane is going to be permeable to nutrients. It's going to block those things that are not nutritious, at least in a non-toxic environment. So our style, our surface, allows the soul to absorb that which it needs for its journey. And when that's happening, we feel comfortable. We feel centered. We feel at ease in our bodies, at ease in our skin, if we do well with the ascendant. Let me take this one step further towards precision. Imagine we describe a person as shy, and then 10 minutes later we describe another person as quiet. Notice how there's a tremendous amount of overlap in the behavioral territory connected with shy and quiet, but we know that the words have almost entirely different meanings. That a person who is shy is introverted but goofy about it, uncomfortable with it. A person who is quiet is introverted and have accepted that about themselves, don't view it as a disorder. They're at ease with themselves. A strong response to an introverted ascendant you could call quiet. A goofy response you could call shy. It's just a way of kind of getting it into somewhat more of an evolutionary paradigm. Now, here's the key. We would like the client to feel at ease in his or her skin with us. So much of this we can accomplish even before we have begun the formal reading through how we interact with that person's ascendant. Let me give you a concrete example of this. This is a kind of a funny story. It's a true story. And it was the beginning of a lot of these thoughts for me. A gentleman was coming to me for an astrological reading, and it was in the most horrible of circumstances. He was not particularly, in my opinion and intuition said, he was not particularly motivated to have the reading, but his girlfriend was really motivated for him to be motivated to have the reading. And if he was ever going to get his bread buttered, if you get my drift, you know. He was going to have to come and endure an astrological reading, you know, to prove he was open-minded and sensitive, you know. So, yeah. It's not a terribly unfamiliar situation for those of us in the trade. And so, you know, this guy's coming to me for the reading. And, you know, I kind of, you know, I knew the lay of the land, that was what was going on. So I had kind of an attitude, you know, about this guy coming in the first place. He pulls up into my driveway. I'm kind of looking out the window, you know, waiting for the client to show up. And he's got this shiny, brand new silver gray BMW. You know, one of those Republican mobiles. You know? And sure enough, you know, he gets out of this, you know, fancy money car. You know, he's got his briefcase. He's got his suit. You know, he's got a haircut. You know. And I hope you're sensing me making some fun of myself in this story. That, you know, I was just as stupid as he was, you know, having those judgmental attitudes about his car and his suit, you know, and all of that. That's his business. But, you know, it was just such a setup, you know, for there to be nothing but static between our styles. You know, he took one look at me, and, you know, it's like obviously I was the opposite of the end of the spectrum. So, you know, I remember it being really awkward. So, you know, we sat down, I'm doing my stuff, getting ready to do the reading, getting all the tapes all set and everything. And then it's like God spoke to me rather literally, you know, about how to handle this situation. And I said probably the most inspired thing I've ever said in the counseling room. I looked at the guy and I said, "Nice car." Now, this gentleman had Leo rising. Leo rising, yeah. Now I would say, you know, if somebody with Leo rising comes into your office, praise them, you know? Because the Leo ascendant, I mean, the idea that Leo energy is always the life of the party is baloney. I mean, you know, experience tells us that's wrong. But there's very typically a kind of quiet dignity, you know, about the Leo energy. And behind that, if we understand it from an evolutionary perspective, is an insecurity. In my opinion, it is often connected with prior life persecution that leads us to feel an inclination to put on a face in the world, like we're only safe if we shine. And that's a bigger subject, different subject than what I want to be looking at here. But the point is, if we praise the Leo ascendant, it feels secure. So I said, "Nice car," to this guy. And all of a sudden, it's like he melted. He was like a little boy with a toy. You know, he was really excited about his new BMW. And he went on for 4 or 5 minutes telling me about cruise control and, you know, just all the different things that this car could do. And I kind of tried to find open-heartedness and sincerity and enjoyed him talking about his car. And we were comfortable with each other, okay? His ascendant told me what steps I had to take initially. And let me say that the first step I had to take was to get over myself, okay? And that's a pretty good rule of thumb, except on those rare days when everything in your chart is trying everything else and the client comes who's, like an ancient soulmate and you're totally on the same page with each other. That'll happen sometimes, and those are precious days. But if we're going to be professional about this work, we have to be able to get over ourselves enough to serve a wide range of people and meet their needs as they are and honor them as they are, and honor them skillfully, not just in principle. Can you imagine? Let's say that was a Leo rising example. Let me do a Scorpio rising example. Okay, here's one. Let's imagine, much to your shock, Jeffrey Wolf Green, comes to you for a reading. Yeah, remember everything trine? This is squares and oppositions, So Jeff's come to you for a reading, Now, imagine what would happen if when he comes for a reading, you won't make eye contact with him, okay? You won't look him in the eye. He's going to sit down with you, talk about his soul, and you're all over the room. Nice car. It's like a joke, right? Yeah. To make a Scorpio rising person feel comfortable, you've got to meet them at that level of intensity. They have been punished all their lives, basically, for being too intense. Don't add to the punishment. Scorpio rising, make that eye contact. Try this. This will sound subtle. It's not subtle. Don't look at their eyes, look into their eyes. Okay? Nothing subtle about that, We know the difference. And that doesn't mean that Scorpio rising person is suddenly going to melt and open up to you. We're talking just ascendant. We're talking initial style. I want to underline that an awful lot of what I'm saying here will happen before you've even begun the formal reading. How you present yourself and how you interact socially with the client. Let me go a little bit further. Let's imagine, we take on something of the question of our language. So here's a woman, we don't know much about her, except astrologically, and she has Capricorn rising, and she's 68 years old, and she has South Node in Virgo conjunct Saturn in the 10th house. Okay, kind of the Dowager Queen, karmically. And she comes in for a reading, and we say, I'm just so fucking glad to meet you, I understand that's an important word in Pluto school, Which is why I use it, Not that I would ever speak like that myself, Now, this clearly is something of a joke. That's not how that woman's chart tells us to relate to her. Now, I added an existential fact. She's in her late 60s. Well, be alert to that. You don't have much information to go on. Use every scrap of it that you've got. Probably this person is going to appreciate a more dignified and formal presentation. I personally, I'm a little obsessive about this because I have Venus in the first house, and at least in the system I use. I would be careful about how I dressed that day with that person coming for a reading. I have a right to wear a Led Zeppelin t-shirt, but, what am I doing here? What's more important, my right to wear a Led Zeppelin t-shirt or my ability to function as a professional with this woman and establish trust with her? She's going to feel more comfortable in a situation that is a bit more formal. So I'll accommodate her. I will present myself more formally. Now, the idea, don't use the famous F word, with the client in the first 2 minutes of the relationship, is fairly generic advice. But let me turn it around. Here's a 16-year-old with, Aquarius rising and a Uranus-Sun conjunction on the South Node. A recalcitrant 16-year-old comes in, for a reading because mom's making her, and every other word out of her mouth is the F word, and she's covered in tattoos, and her hair is a color not found in nature, And if you want to establish rapport with her, you better start using the F word pretty quickly. If you're not using that F word, she's going to think you're judging her, So you say, yeah, oh, it's fucking great to meet you. And she thinks, oh, you're cool. I mean, we're all laughing. It's good we're laughing. The ascendant, it's really the game of life in a way that we all wear masks in the world, and we can't help it. If we didn't have a mask, nobody would know we were here. Most of what we learn bouncing off each other. It is kind of silly, it is kind of arbitrary, but being skillful about receiving the message of that ascendant is just pivotal in establishing initial rapport. Now, if you've blown that, it doesn't mean the day is ruined. Possibly you can regain somebody's trust, but first impressions are incredibly important, just incredibly important. When we think about the theater of the counseling situation, and the ascendant tells you how to handle it. And again, I repeat, get over yourself and relate to the client. Build the bridge. Let's assume you've done that. And our next aim is the sun. Now, there's a tendency in traditional astrology books to horribly blur the ascendant and the sun. It's unbelievable that two symbols that are so elemental and so basic to the system could be so confused. You'll still read books, the Muggle astrology books. You'll Harry Potter, right? Yeah. Okay. You read some of those books, and it's like, oh, the sun, that means your identity. The ascendant, that means your identity. Well, show me something in your chart that doesn't mean your identity. Yeah. What has that taught us? There's a sharp distinction, between these. The sun, center of the solar system. Everything orbits the sun, whether it likes it or not. Okay? Let's interview the planet Uranus. How do you feel about orbiting the sun, doing exactly what the sun says? Uranus hates it, but still, just got to keep circling that sun. So there's this gravitational center in every human being. The ancient words of Hermes thrice majestic, Hermes Trismegistus, as above, so below, metaphysical father of Western civilization, that the structure of the solar system and the structure of human consciousness are locked in resonance with each other, that they reflect each other, are structured according to the same laws. The inner sun, the gravitational center of your head. Now, what is the ascendant? What is the sun? These are questions that we could spend a week talking about, and I focus on particular dimensions of them here that are most pertinent to this particular presentation. If we think of the sun as that around which everything orbits, that which holds us together, works better in some of us than others of us, as you may have noticed, The planets all represent voices in your head. The voices in your head do not always agree with each other, as you've perhaps detected. Here are two voices I just about guarantee we've all heard. One voice is saying, I can't possibly stay in this relationship. The other voice is saying, I can't possibly leave this relationship. They get talking at about 4 in the morning, Won't be long before it's 5 in the morning and you're still looking at the clock. We've all been there. The voices arguing. One saying, I need my Uranian independence. The other one saying, I need my Venusian or my lunar sense of connectedness, And they're fighting it out. We're in a tough situation. And we feel crazy, right? We've all been there. Feel crazy when those voices are duking it out and you don't know whether you're in the relationship or not, or don't know whether you're going to take the job in California or not, or whatever the dilemma of your life is. And then along comes the sun, and it says, you guys orbit me, we're in this relationship, for example, There's a voice back there that says, but, and the Son says, shut up. Here's what we're doing. And what follows is coherent, decisive use of will. That we know who we are, we have decided what our bottom line values are. And of course the answer equally might be I'm leaving the relationship, either way. But core bottom line values. The Son, one thing we can say about it is it is that to which you must be true if you're going to be real, if you're going to be whole, if you're going to be yourself, which is to say if you're going to be sane in a simple garden variety sense of the word sane. You know what you're about. You have a certain coherence in your life. Your values have informed the decisions of your life. This is all completely solar material. So I underscore the idea of basic values for the Son. That's one piece, but it's the piece I want to emphasize here, that a person with a sane life will be living according to a coherent set of values, which in turn can be related back to the Son. Now, if we're going to trust someone, it's very important that there be common values. It's elemental. I had a really very painful experience back in North Carolina in the fall, before the election. A truly dear friend of mine was getting married. And this is a woman I've known for many, many years. She's like 58 or something like that, a therapist in North Carolina. And she wanted me to meet her intended. And so, my wife and I went out to dinner with them, met in a restaurant, and, I was quite open-hearted about meeting this guy because I've loved this woman so much, and for 20 years. And we get sitting there together, and the subject of the war in Iraq comes up. And, Jody and I made noises that you would probably not be terribly surprised about regarding our position on that decision. And it was a little awkward because this guy supported Bush. He was really kind of a good guy. I don't want to just condemn this man. He had a lot of good values, and, his soul was dear to somebody whose soul was dear to me. But damn if I could become his friend, Because I was so hot about that war and about what Bush represented. Now, that's my little monkey ego. I think God's up there agreeing. But that's the nature of the little monkey ego. Of course, we always think God's on our side. And I don't want to get all political here, but the idea is that I could not find it in myself to be friends with this man because our values were so opposed. And it created a really awkward situation for me and a good friend. But how can you trust somebody whose values are so antithetical to yours? Make sense? Okay. With the client, once you've used ascendant wisdom to establish rapport with the person, then we begin to build a basis for trust with the person. Now, this is a fairly subtle operation. I would think, imagine a client comes to you who is, let us say, a Capricorn or a Virgo. This example would probably apply to either of those rather neatly. And of course, let me use the eternal add-on, depending on the rest of the chart, things could be more complicated. You got your Aries with 9 planets in Pisces. It's not your grandmother's Aries, so we have to be sensitive to all of that. But, a fairly coherently Capricornian or Virgoan kind of person comes to you for a reading. Maybe they've got Gemini rising, okay? And so the initial contact, the initial generation of rapport, there's a certain playfulness, a certain chatty kind of thing. We got to, interrupt each other, find out the rhythm of interrupting each other comfortably, and just buzz a little bit and let them know that they can be themselves with you. Okay, get hooked into that Gemini ascendant. But now, once that is happening, we have to begin to establish trust. And the basic values of that Capricorn or Virgo person are going to include a real sense that I need my time to be productive. I need to be getting useful, productive, concrete results out of this reading. Okay? So your task in establishing trust with this client is to get down to business and show your competence. Show that you are orderly. Even if you're a Pisces with Neptune square the sun, you know, you may have to reach deep, you know, to show that you're orderly. But if you're a Pisces with Neptune square the sun, hey, that means all the colors of the rainbow are there inside of you, including a little voice that knows how to be orderly. And again, get over yourself. Reach out to the client. This Virgo or Capricorn person wants value delivered in those minutes. Don't waste their time. Make sure that what you're saying is substantiated. If you're working within the evolutionary paradigm, as of course we all are, if you elaborate on how this Virgo or Capricorn person was a red-headed pizza waitress in Dusseldorf in 1932, and you go on in great detail about that, and they have no evidence for that in their experience, you're going to lose them. But maybe you say, you know, you have all this industry in your life and in your nature. Have you ever wondered why you're a pizza waitress now? Okay, there we begin to understand, you know, how the karmic stuff can be relevant. What was going on there is we put it into the verifiable category as quickly as possible. Because the Virgo and the Capricorn, they're going to want to see that it's real. They're going to want to know that they have a basis for trusting you because you're a realistic, hard-headed, shrewd person who knows that not every idea that sounds cool is therefore true. Okay? So you're delivering value according to the nature of that Capricorn energy or that Virgo energy. I did a long, complex counseling process with a very wonderful woman who'd been rather bizarrely wounded in her family of origin. She was an Aquarian. And she was living very much up in her head. And, you know, being an air sign is not a totally bad idea. You know, air has to do with concepts and thinking and all of that. But she was really kind of hiding out in that dissociated condition. I did a long series of sessions with her in which I applied this principle and realized that for her to trust me, I had to show that I was smart and original and would engage with her at the level of abstract discussion. And, you know, I don't like abstract discussion that much. I'm a Capricorn. You know, I like to get down to what works and what's real. But, you know, she wanted astrological theory and, you know, so, you know, for many months, I would see her every few weeks, worked at a level that would seem completely unproductive from a normal psychotherapeutic point of view or astro counseling point of view, kind of abstract. But she began to trust me because I could operate with her at that purely intellectual level where she felt safe. And then some deeper work began. Had to do with her Pisces moon, but I don't want to get there quite yet. But once again, letting that Aquarian quality of concern with concept inform my strategy for establishing rapport with her. Another client with whom I worked regularly for a long time, like 15 years, and she was widely known around town as the biggest bitch in Chapel Hill, North Carolina. I mean, really, you know, and an Aries from New York. So, is that 2 strikes and a fastball or what, you know? And this one, you know, my breakthrough with her was fighting with her. You know, she was an Aries. You know, she liked that I'd stand up to her. You know, we'd tussle, get mad at each other, and I just affirm, you know, this is okay. I still like you and everything, but I'm mad as hell at you. And she, oh, great. You know, she was so used to scaring people and carrying this bitch, you know, hat. That you know, being with somebody who'd just engage with her in an Aries way helped her feel comfortable. It's like she naturally valued the idea that conflict was not the opposite of connection, not the opposite of love. That for her, conflict was part of the process of loving. And that if somebody would not engage with her in conflict, it meant that they were rejecting her, not trusting her, that kind of thing. So it was when I began to fight with her and get angry at her and still love her, that we had that rapport at the level of values. Okay? There's another example of how it works. A decision you'll have to face, and you face it at the sun level. How open is this client to being pushed? Now, some people are quite open to it, some are not. Here's something I've taken a fair amount of heat about out in the Muggle astrology world, that there's a big presumption that you can't do astrology really without talking to the person, engaging the person in conversation, and people have to tell you where they are in life. And of course, it's self-evidently a useful idea in many ways. And I understand it's an important part of the evolutionary, the Pluto school paradigm, to determine where the person's level of consciousness is, and so on. It's a place where what I teach is different, complementary. I take a different approach. What I do is I put a tremendous value on honoring the client's right to be silent. That you don't have to share anything with me until you feel comfortable doing that. Now, somebody with 9 planets in Sagittarius, they're going to feel comfortable, probably, opening up. But they're, a 4th house Cancer person, might be a little slower. Their values are more built around self-protection and feeling safe. So Jeff and I were doing an interview for a French magazine this morning. The subject came up, and there's a certain irony in it that my readings, they're almost never less than 2 hours. And Jeff can do a reading in 15 minutes. That's why he's got the shiny BMW and I drive some piece of crap, But see, what I do when a client does not want to reveal anything about themselves, and I'm not so able to assess where they are, is I just give them the whole package. Here's what it looks like if you're quite unconscious. Here's what it looks like in the middle. Here's the higher ground, and it's real inefficient, but it preserves the client's right to remain silent. And it's funny, once you've honored that person's right to remain silent, once you've let them know that you're not going to press their boundaries, of course, then they're inclined to trust you and open up. But, Cancer energy, which is, basically what I'm talking about here, or 4th house energy. I like to go back and, we think of the crab, of course, for Cancer, but in the old days, real old days, it was the turtle. That was the Babylonian image for the crab. And so here's a turtle in the woods. You're going for a walk. You run into a little turtle. And you say, "Hey, baby, I've always wanted to meet a turtle. Put it there." What does the turtle do? Pulls the head inside the shell. If you want to see that turtle's face, how long are you going to have to wait? If you want to see the turtle's face, you sit there 20 feet away, quietly and patiently. And after a while, maybe that turtle sticks its head out, gets to know you. Some people are like that, and they have a right to exist. They have a right to be like that. And I want to be very careful to not fry somebody like that. I want them to feel safe. The Cancer person, or the 4th house person, or the highly lunar person is a more vulnerable creature. They're naturally more self-protective. We have to let their chart tell us that about them and tailor our approach in that respectful, gentle kind of way. I remember when my wife was first doing readings, she's been at it a long time now, and one of the lines I'd hear around the house sometimes was, "Oh shit, somebody's coming with a 4th house sun." She was so scared of people with 4th house suns, She's had some bad experiences, and people, it wasn't like they didn't like the readings, but they'd sit there. And she's got a 7th house moon, so she needs some feedback and some interaction, and and so she hadn't quite learned to trust the symbols yet, and just kind of go forward, and that complete lack of response, which you don't always see that with the 4th house, but it'll typically start out that way. That was putting her off. If you just get in your game, after a while, they start to realize they're getting value, and then they'll start to open up. But never push them. It's counterproductive. So you get some feeling here for how the sun gives you a sense of the person's basic values, and you can use that as a way of establishing trust once you have established rapport through the ascendant, in that order. Now, we come to an important cusp here, as we're about to approach the moon. And there's a real shifting of gears that happens here, not just because the moon is a very different symbol, but we're changing our approach almost entirely. With the ascendant and the sun, what I've been speaking of could be construed by the prosecutor as manipulative techniques. Okay? And I'll own that. What this teaches you, you can use these techniques that I've just revealed to you to get in people's pants if you want to. It'll work. You can use these techniques to sell them used cars. It works for that too. This is how to establish trust with somebody by partly changing your own persona so that you're an efficient vehicle for the counseling work. And it's a slight little tweak of that to turn it into something really toxic and really dangerous and really damaging. So use this power judiciously, in the light of the laws of karma. Key point is that we have altered our behavior in order to establish a desired result with the client, which is basically connection, so that the bridge is there that can sustain the weight of this incredible information that we're about to give the person. The Holy Grail is to arrive at the moon. With the sun in the ascendant, we took active roles in connecting. With the moon, you shift gears. With the moon, what you do is you wait. You wait for the moon to show itself. It's, again, a little while ago talking about the turtle in the woods. Moon, of course, rules Cancer. It's got some of that same energy to it. So we wait. But we wait skillfully. The novelist from the 1930s, highly Platonian novelist, Henry Miller, once wrote a collection of essays called "Stand Still Like the Hummingbird." Isn't that a beautiful title? That's a real piece of poetry, Stand still like the hummingbird with the client once you've done that sun and ascendant material, and wait skillfully with alertness for the moon to reveal itself. Now, each moon will reveal itself in its own unique way, but there are certain generic statements that we can make about the moon. One of them I made earlier, that the moon is ridiculous. The moon carries the part of us that is silly and loose and completely human. Here's a metaphor that I'm pretty confident is dying before our eyes in our generation. Letting our hair down with somebody. I'm sure there's some kids who would say, what does that mean, But we all kind of remember it, Letting our hair down with somebody, which means we're relaxed, we're loose, we're comfortable. We look for this feeling, a kind of warmth, a kind of spontaneity that comes into the air, that the person just seems to get looser. They're smiling more. They're expressing more emotion. Moon is inherently a nurturing function. Now, there can be some very damaged moons out there where you won't see this so clearly, but the moon generically, relating to the mother archetype, wants to be the great breast upon which we suck. And the moon enjoys giving of itself that way. Like, here's something to watch out for. If a client, says to you, you're launched into the reading, you've gone a little way with it, and the client makes a statement like, "Gee, don't you get tired doing this?" I mean, you'll hear it sometimes, Or, "How long have you been doing this?" Begin to show interest in you, interest in your well-being. You know, if you start to see those signs that the client is concerned about your condition, we know that we're recognizing the moon signature in their behavior. This is the green light that we're looking for as we begin to reveal the deepest material. For this reason, and really quite fundamentally for this reason, my own style and what I teach in my program is we look at the chart from an evolutionary perspective. It's rather parallel to what you learn in Pluto School in terms of the bottom lines, a lot of focus on the nodes and planetary and so on. And we speak a language rather similar to the Pluto School language, and we get all that information, we understand it as well as we can. We know that the soul, as represented in that evolutionary condition, is using the present birth chart as a tool for the fulfillment of that evolutionary intention. That's what's supposed to be happening, at least. And we make that kind of understanding, but all that is to ourselves, all that is silent inside the astrologer's own consciousness as we attempt to get the whole gestalt of what's going on for the soul. But then when it comes to the strategy for the presentation of this material to the client, I advocate with my students always beginning with an analysis of the sun, the moon, and the ascendant. Partly because they're important. You know, they're part of the basic vehicle that the soul is using. I encourage my students to not really bring in the deep evolutionary material right away. It's profoundly pertinent. There's nothing more pertinent in astrology. But what we're trying to do here is to win the trust of the client, to make that connection with the client. So we would like the initial material to not be so charged, not be so heavy. We want the client to feel understood and safe. Plus, we're going to need that information out there anyway. And then we tend to build to a kind of crescendo where we bring in the karmic material, bring it in overtly. It's sort of informed what we're doing up until that point, but only when we are presumably at our maximum level of trust and connection with the client do we put the maximum weight on the bridge of trust between ourselves and the client. This seems like a skillful technique for doing this incredibly ferocious work of evolutionary astrology. Now, here's a little story, true story about the moon. A very emotional story. It should be if it's about the moon. There was a girl came to me at the behest of her mother for a kind of astrologically informed counseling session. And this girl was about 16 or so at the time. And I'd known her for a while. And she was Capricorn with an Aries moon, actually, like me. So there was a natural connection between us. But her moon was in the 7th house. And this is kind of a 7th house moon story. When she was very young, she'd been abused sexually. And of course, that's a dreadful thing, but in all the different flavors of sexual abuse, this was one of the milder ones. It was, the abuser was a brother like 5 years older than her. So, you know, it was just another kid, essentially. Messy, but what made the situation completely damaging for everybody concerned was that the government authorities became involved. The fact that the 13-year-old brother had been feeling up the 5-year-old sister or 8-year-old sister or something, terrible as that is, it launched into the county's ordinances, and the social workers got involved, and there were all sorts of required procedures that essentially criminalized the 13-year-old brother and had an incredibly divisive effect on the family. So this little Capricorn, 4th house Capricorn girl with a 7th house moon was feeling quite responsible for damaging her brother. You know, that was the main thing that was going on with her. And she learned, she was smart. She learned how to kind of work the system, that, she had to please everybody in the system, enter their belief system in order to get them off her back. So that's the background. she comes in to do the session because her mother wisely knew that she was still kind of a mess from this whole thing, but the mama didn't know how to sort it all out and probably wasn't the person for the job anyway, being the mother. So this girl came in, and she knew why she was there, and we brought up this subject, and I invited her to begin to speak about it, and it was scary. She started on about how, I know that my sexual boundaries to which I have a right were crossed when I was very young, and as a result I have boundary issues, and I have to really be careful about boundary issues, said she. And of course she's right. I mean, it is right. But you could also see that she was like a parrot, a smart parrot, trained by the social workers to say these words. And when she said these words, she was declared cured, and her family was able to kind of get off and be by itself and actually try to do some kind of healing, but with the government off their back. And that was the truth of what was going on here. Okay, so she had this incredible defense. Now, I'd gone through her ascendant, gone through her son, doing pretty well. Come to the moment when I want to reach out for her moon a bit. I could sense that she seemed to be kind of hungry. She didn't want to leave. It's a sign that seventh house moon was signaling me a little bit. She kind of liked being there, but she didn't really want to go there into the deeper place. So I asked her to put her finger out like this. And she didn't know why I was asking that, but it wasn't a very threatening thing, so she just stuck her finger out in front of her like this, kind of pointing at me. And I just stuck my finger out and touched my fingertip to her fingertip and looked at her gently, lovingly. Got into her seventh house moon. I just loved her with a little bit of physical contact. Here was a man loving her and touching her intentionally, fingertip to fingertip, the most unthreatening touch I could conceive of. And inside of 5 seconds, tears pouring down her cheeks. And she began to really talk like a 16-year-old girl about the hell that the government had put her through, and eventually we got down to how she was angry at her brother too about all of this, kind of last on the list. But feel the moon energy, seventh house moon energy in that? Just a little bit of contact. Now, a person, the proverbial person from Mars comes down and observes that interaction and wouldn't know what happened. But we're human, we know what happens. That's the way of the moon. It's the way of the heart. You trust your own instincts. And sometimes it'll come down to touch. The touch stuff, you will, in my experience, is typically more important with an earth moon, particularly, or a water moon. I'd say the earth is most likely, and then the water moon. Like when a client with, let's say, a Capricorn moon, traditionally a tough nut to crack, client with a Capricorn moon, when they signal that they are ready to trust you, they may very well just, brush your knee with their hand, the way people do when they're loose with each other, just kind of get your attention by touching your knee. And you think about the symbolism there, touching the knee, that suggests a kind of trust. The moon is tactile, especially in earth. There was a gentleman with a Scorpio moon, and his chart, from a more evolutionary perspective, suggested that he had probably had an experience roughly on these lines, not a terribly uncommon one, that he had been a monk in a prior lifetime, probably not fully because he needed to be or wanted to be, but that's where he wound up as the useless third son or something like this, and that the fundamental problem with being a monk was that he was sexually repressed as a monk, and he was not at an evolutionary state where it was appropriate for him to let go of sexuality. Many of us who show that kind of monastic karma in our charts will also show sexual damage from those monastic experiences. It's not uncommon at all. Now, this man who, from an evolutionary perspective, had experienced arrested sexual development. His sexuality lagged behind the rest of his evolution. In this lifetime, with his Scorpio moon, after establishing connection with him, as I've described through ascendant and sun, he felt safe enough to begin to reveal to me that he had sexual attraction to children. And of course, he was trying to be a good human being, but he had this compelling sexual attraction to children. I did not know him well enough to know if he had acted on that at the time. His position was he had not acted on that. I'm a little suspicious of that. But, I don't know. I'm not there to be a detective. I'm there to help as much as I can. But the rest was fairly conventional, I laugh a little to say it, evolutionary astrology, a transaction that I'm sure most of you are quite familiar with, where as soon as we began to put these sexual feelings towards children in the context of the actual realities of his soul history, he began to experience understanding of why arrested sexual development had been afflicted upon him in the name of Jesus or Buddha or something like this, and now he was stuck with this arrested sexual development, and the resolution of that, was his evolutionary intent in this lifetime. What we did is we took the shame, or at least a significant part of the shame, out of the equation, that it was natural and understandable that he would experience the most obvious effect of arrested sexual development, which is the desire to have sex with somebody who's not very developed, a little kid. That's why the priests are filling up the little boys, right? Simple as that. And once we understand it, the forgiveness arises. Now, that's a very familiar scenario in the evolutionary astrological counseling room, when the deep material comes up and guilt is released and replaced with understanding. But the point is that it was an act of incredible courage and trust for this man to reveal to me that he had these feelings. And I don't think he would have revealed that to me unless I had somewhat skillfully established rapport with him through his ascendant, and then established a kind of values level communion through the sun. And then his Scorpio moon said, okay, I think I'll take the risk. And I waited, and his Scorpio secret revealed itself, and then the work could unfold. So there it is in a nutshell. Rapport through the ascendant, a basis for trust connected with core values with the sun, and then a patient waiting for the moon to reveal itself according to its own nature. When the moon does that, then you can give the person everything you've got, because they have signaled you energetically that they are ready, they trust you, and they can receive this material without damage. That's our green light. Well, I hope you've gotten something out of this. Thank you so much.